Sir, I have an opinion on this matter.
Yeah, go on.
Well, it seems to me, sir, that God gave me a special gift, made me a fine instrument of warfare. Amen.
Oh, that's brilliant, Pumpkin.
Hey everybody, Steven here, and today I'm going to be talking about the difference between flexibility and mobility. And this is really just based off of my certification in something called functional range conditioning. It's just a mobility modality. Now, this may be one of those things where you don't agree with a lot of the things that I'm saying, and that's okay. I'm just talking about where I'm coming from that point of view. So, mobility for me prior to the FRC, the functional range conditioning certification, was one of those things where I would just say it's active movement. But if you pressed me harder on it, I couldn't really go beyond just that. It's something where it was like a wishy-washy explanation of it, and the FRC has really honed in what mobility is. And so for me now, mobility is the range of motion that you control. Not just in terms of, I think active is okay, but it is one of those things where I could say, well, I'm walking actively. Well, a certain portion of that may be you going between mobility and flexibility. Flexibility is passive range of motion. Mobility is active range of motion. So you're constantly in this state of switching between those two things. But if I'm just looking at pure mobility, it's active range of motion, but it's really the range of motion that I control, fully control, right? And I think that's where people end up kind of hitting a roadblock, and they end up telling me certain things where they say, well, I'm doing this particular action. It's like, yeah, but if, like, for instance, a flat-footed squat, like, how much of that is actually active versus passive? How much of that do you actually control? That's the big word I'm going to harp on here, versus you're just passively getting there. So I think a lot of movements, because of that, end up being one of these things where there's a certain portion of it that is your mobility and a certain portion of it that is your flexibility. Now, keep in mind, your mobility is built on the backbone of your flexibility, meaning I'm never going to be more mobile than I am flexible. We talk about, in my previous term for this would be like hypermobility, which is true hypermobility is pretty rare, right? So for a lot of people, what they really have is hyperflexibility. So one person, a comment that he did on another piece of content that I made, he was talking about the splits aren't natural and they are harmful to people. And my first thought was, well, what percentage of that is flexible or flexibility for that person versus what portion of that is mobility? Meaning, what portion of their splits do they fully control versus they're just pushing themselves to an extreme end range? Now, with FRC, the thing that I like about this modality is they're saying, hey, let's improve your end range of motion. For a lot of people, that's where an injury occurs. I talk about ankle inversion with this. Your typical ankle sprain is an ankle inversion sprain. Eversion, the opposite direction, is pretty rare. Most people are, 99% of ankle sprains are an inversion sprain. And what we're seeing here is, for some people, and I'm actually going to showcase a video of my ankle mobility, the range of motion that I actually control, versus what I can just push myself to, and that would be my flexibility, right? Those two end ranges are different. My end range with my mobility is different than my end range with my flexibility. The disparity between those 2 points, though, right, is that space that lies between those 2 points is typically where we're going to find an injury. In FRC, we say when load exceeds tissue capacity, we have an injury. We see that in sports all the time, right? But going back to this ankle inversion, if I'm running and my ankle, right, it bends, but it can only go so far, and then I just literally push it to its end range in terms of flexibility, that load is going to exceed that tissue capacity most likely. Not all the time, but most of the time it does. So what we're trying to do is get that mobility, that range of motion that you control, as close to your flexibility as possible. Now, that is a blanket statement, right? Dewey Nelson, the guy that did my certification, I love his thinking in regards to this, because one of the things he says a lot is like, I'm answering the question before I've even asked it. How much mobility does a person need? I don't know. It's dependent. Are you an athlete? Or are you just doing it because you want to have it, right? There needs to be a why behind it. Me just giving you more range of motion for sake of range of motion may not be the best thing, right? It's a lot of work, right? And it's really, really hard to keep up with, right? One of the reasons we lose mobility, that active range of motion over time, is because your body really is a use it or lose it. If I'm not going there, my body has zero incentive to keep it, okay? So for some people, it's one of those things where, all right, why do you need it? Okay, well, I need it because I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I play baseball, I play football, I'm an avid runner, I'm a gymnast, whatever it may be. Or I just sit at a desk all day and I know this is important. So I need a set amount of mobility, right? Active range of motion, because what I'm doing now, I don't need it at all, right? And I know that that's going to be detrimental. Those are two polar opposite people, right? The athlete needs it for performance over here. They're going to need more than the person over here that's just doing a desk job, right? They still need it. Let's still work on it, but I don't need to get them necessarily where this athlete over here maybe needs to get. So something to keep in mind with this. So with all of this, I'm actually going to highlight that difference again between mobility and flexibility with my hamstring. And I want to harp on the fact that mobility is strength training, right? I'm trying to get stronger at my end range of motion because I know that that equals more control, right? Nobody comes to me as a personal trainer and they come in here like, hey, I want less control with my body. Can you give that to me, please? Whatever their goal is, there's some level of control. I want to lose weight. I want some control over my body, right? Well, I want to gain more mobility. I want more control of my range of motion, right? So that's the big thing here is control, but also durability, right? It is one thing to get to your end range of motion in terms of your mobility every now and then. It's another thing to train there, to get strong there, to build durability. Going back to the ankle. Now, if I start to push that ankle, right, and I've not only improved my end range of motion in terms of mobility, but I've trained there, right? I got strong there. I've just diminished the potential for an injury. There is no such thing as injury prevention. I don't want you to think that. That's something I still say, and then I put the little ... and little put the asterisks on it. That's not really a thing, right? We're talking about like injury mitigation. We're trying to get it there and really just try to diminish any outcome, right? You can't just 100% prevent injuries. It just doesn't, that's not a thing. It doesn't work. But if we can go in there and make you stronger, we know that you're going to be more durable, you're going to be strong there. If we go there, we're much less likely to have anything happen. And even if we did have an injury, the outcome of that, had I been training there, would be greatly diminished had I not been training there, okay? So durability is the other big thing that we do with this. This takes a lot of work. It's really, really hard to do. But think about mobility as strength training, right? That whole just blanket statement of it's just, active range of motion when I like move in space. No. We're talking about like taking you to the end range of what you actually control and then forcing you to get stronger there or to gain more range of motion, right? More, not passive range of motion, more active range of motion, like I said, that you fully control, okay? Most people in their mobility practices, they're not even getting towards their end range. They're just thinking like, hey, I just move in space, that's mobility. So, and like I said, thinking about it as what portion of it, you could do like a shin box for instance, and then a portion of that could just be your flexibility. It wouldn't even be your mobility, right? There'd be mobility in that, but we've done this mixture. It's not pure mobility. Another thing that I see, by the way, is these soft tissue drills or foam rolling. We're using the lacrosse ball, and something Andrew Ospina said, and that's the creator of functional range conditioning. And he said, with this, that's the adjunct, right? So FRC is really the main course, right? We can still do the soft tissue. It's still important, but it shouldn't be the thing that is your thinking is going to unlock your mobility. I like to say like passive inputs is passive outcomes, meaning like that is a passive thing that you're doing to the body. You're just rolling on it, right? You're not activating anything, right? It's still good, right? You may have a restriction where the muscle's really, really tight. You need to loosen it up a little bit, then go do that. Your mobility practice will be better. But if you're solely relying on soft tissue work to 100% improve your mobility, and with that, the strength and the durability, right? With whatever range of motion you're trying to get, it's just not gonna happen, right? Me foam rolling doesn't mean my joint at end range is going to get stronger or it's gonna be more durable. So keeping that in mind as well. It's not that you can't do those. A lot of times I'll do some of this stuff and I need to do a little bit of soft tissue drills. I need to do a little bit of foam rolling. I need to use the lacrosse ball or the alpha ball or anything like that. Loosen up the tissue a little bit before I go do. And with this, we have something called controlled articular rotations or pale rails or pal rows or end range lifts, end range holds, eccentric neural grooves, all these different things. I'm gonna go do one of those things. Well, yeah, I may need to do it beforehand, but a lot of times I don't. So this system has been phenomenal in improving my personal mobility. So let's actually get to the hamstring stretch. Let's talk about what I'm doing in this, why it's important, and what the difference really is, and showcasing that between mobility and flexibility. All right, so I'm in my rail support system here. A little bit of a mess, I just reconfigured this, but with this, I do hamstring pale rails on this. That is progressive angular isometric loading and then regressive angular isometric loading. This is the way that we actually gain new end range of mobility, right? We gain mobility with this. And remember, it's one thing to gain more mobility, it's another thing to actually train there, to get stronger there, to build durability there, right? So for this, my leg would be here, okay? Now, I'm gonna tilt my pelvis forward because if I tuck my pelvis here and then I round my back, I haven't actually stretched out my hamstring more, I've just rounded my back, right? Being conscious of, are you actually just shifting another joint, right? Are you kind of just like morphing your body around the stretch, or is it a pure isolated stretch? Now, as I said earlier, mobility is built on the backbone of flexibility. So for me, this would be the setup for a pale rail here. I would get set, I would tilt my pelvis forward, because as I tilt my pelvis forward, I'm actually getting more into hip capsule here versus tucking my pelvis, I'm taking away from that. But as I do that, you should feel more stretch on the hamstring. Keeping my sternum and my belly button equidistant, so they stay here. So if they come closer together, I know I'm rounding my back. If I bring my chest tall and I keep these 2 points the same distance and I bow forward, I'll know that I'm not rounding my back, right? So as I'm here and I stretch, this is my end range in terms of my flexibility right now, okay? So, pale rail, we would do a whole time schema, setup, all of that other stuff. That would be passive, right? If you were to lie me on my back right now, one of the things that I could look at is because I lift my leg to the same position. If I'm here, that's mobility, I control that, right? So, we're looking at that difference between flexibility and mobility. What I control actively versus passively, right? Stretch, passive, right? Yoga, for instance, we're talking about that is more passive, like flexibility, than it is mobility. Are you gaining a little bit of mobility? Yes. I'm holding these poses for long periods of time. I'm gaining some level of control. But in that pose, am I at end range? Am I trying to improve end range? Am I trying to gain more control at end range? Thus, more mobility, right? Now that's a spectrum also, right? If I'm looking at center with that, I control and I'm the strongest at center, and then as I start to go further and further away from that, I get a little bit weaker, weaker. Well, we can just surmise from that though, if I train end range, everything from end range all the way to where I'm strongest will get stronger also, right? But just training in the middle ground does some, right? It's just not going to be as good as going to end range and trying to get stronger at end range, okay? So for me here, we would, in this pale, we would hold here, minute and a half, 2 minutes. That's that flexibility. We know that we actually get tissue change at a minute and a half, 2 minutes. We get a physiological change. Here, the pail would be driving down, right? Getting this all tight, and then the rail would be trying to lift my leg up, but I'm at end range, so it won't lift. So as I try to lift up and I activate this, I'll pull myself actively into my new end range. Mobility, right? I'm actively doing this. It's a range of motion that I control, right? That's how I would gain new mobility here, right? So looking at that difference, flexibility, passive, right? Mobility, yes, active, I control it. I'm not just moving around, it's just not activity. It's what I actually control with this. So remember, mobility is built on the backbone of flexibility. So hopefully that helped you guys. If you guys have questions, definitely let me know. I'm gonna put links for the FRC Instagram page. I'll put a link for their website. They have an insane amount of info. If you have the opportunity to train with an FRC trainer, I definitely recommend it, or do kin stretch is another thing. They have so many different things within their system. But anybody that is under the functional range systems modality, definitely check them out. This is a very intriguing modality, and it's led me down a new path and showed me kind of a different viewpoint for all of this. Now, I do want to say, and they talk about this when you go to the cert, yeah, people are going to disagree with this. They may not agree with what I'm talking about here, and that's okay, right? We're all trying to push the industry forward, but let's have a dialogue versus what I really see in the industry right now is just people shitting all over each other and saying that my way is the only way, right? And that's just not how this works. This is one way you could go about this, right? And I think this is valuable information, but there are other ways to get there too, that maybe somebody else has a different viewpoint and they could be right also. So that is it. If you guys like the video, hit the like button for me. If you have questions, by the way, hit me up in the comment section. I want to start a dialogue on this stuff. But if you want to continue to follow along with all of my content, hit the subscribe button for me. Thanks so much for watching.